The solicitor said the words twice before Marcus understood them. The property was transferred 18 months ago. He sat across the desk from a man he had never met, in an office that smelled of old carpet and printer toner, and he heard those words, and he looked at the document in front of him, and he saw his stepmother's name printed where his father's name used to be. Just her name, no one else's. The house his father had paid off over 31 years. The house where Marcus had learned to ride a bike in the back garden, and where his sister Diane had gotten married on a warm September afternoon. The house with the crack in the kitchen tiles that his dad always said he would fix, and never did. That house now belonged entirely to a woman who had been in their lives for 9 years. And his father had been dead for 11 days. Marcus would later describe the feeling as watching the floor disappear, not falling, just standing in a place where the floor used to be with nothing beneath him yet, the drop not yet registered. He folded the document carefully along its original crease. He thanked the solicitor. He walked to his car and sat in the car park for 40 minutes without starting the engine. That is where this story begins, not with the betrayal itself, because the betrayal happened long before anyone knew what to call it. It begins with a son sitting in a car park on a gray Tuesday morning in March, holding a document that rearranged everything he thought he knew about the last 2 years of his father's life. Ray Calloway was born in Coventry in 1953 and spent most of his working life doing the same thing, building things that lasted. He was a contracts manager for a mid-sized construction firm for 26 years, a steady job with decent pay and a company pension that he had contributed to without fail since he was 32. He was not rich. He was not poor. He was the kind of man who knew exactly what he had, tracked it carefully, and slept reasonably well because of it. By the time he retired at 64, Ray had a pension income of approximately £22,000 a year, a mortgage-free house in Solihull worth around £340,000 at market rate, roughly $47,000 in a cash ISA he had built up over the previous decade, and a small defined benefit top-up from a previous employer that added another $4,000 annually. He was not going to travel the world. He was going to be comfortable, and he was going to leave something behind for his children. That had always been the plan. He had said it plainly. Marcus heard him say it. At Christmas dinner 7 years ago, Ray had looked around the table and said something like, "Whatever I've got, it goes to you too when I'm done with it." Simple as that. He said it the way men of his generation said things like that, not as a promise, more as a statement of obvious fact. The way you'd say, "Of course the heating's included," or "Of course I'll pick you up from the airport." It did not occur to anyone at the table that evening that it needed to be written down anywhere other than in the mind of the man who said it. That was the first thing Ray never got around to doing, making a will. Marcus was 41 when his father died. He managed a logistics depot in Birmingham, a job he had held for 7 years and was genuinely good at. He was divorced, amicably enough, with a teenage daughter named Priya who stayed with him every other weekend and whose school fees he split with his ex-wife. He was not struggling financially, but he was not comfortable either. He had about $12,000 in savings, a modest flat he was paying a mortgage on, and a growing awareness that if he wanted to retire before 70, he would need to start making decisions he had been putting off. His sister Diane was 38 and lived in Bristol with her husband and 2 young children. She worked part-time as a school administrator. Her husband drove lorries. They were fine, but fine the way that most families with young children and a single full income are fine, meaning any significant expense required a conversation and a spreadsheet and probably a sacrifice somewhere else. Neither of them had ever worried much about their father's house. It was always just there, the way certain things are just there until they are not. Ray had met Linda Pierce at a bereavement support group 3 years after his first wife, Marcus and Diane's mother Carol, died of a stroke in 2012. Linda was 57 when they met. She had been widowed herself. She had a daughter from her first marriage who lived in Australia and whom she spoke to rarely. She was warm in the way that people who have survived grief are sometimes warm, not effusive, but genuinely present, genuinely attentive to the people around her. Marcus had liked her mostly, or rather he had accepted her, which he recognized was not quite the same thing, but which he told himself was close enough. Diane had been warmer about it. Their father was lonely, and Linda made him less lonely, and that mattered. She moved into the Solihull house in 2017, 2 years after she and Ray started seeing each other, and they married quietly in a registry office in 2018 with Marcus, Diane, and a handful of Ray's oldest friends as witnesses. There was no prenuptial agreement. Ray had not suggested one, and Linda had not raised it. Marcus had thought about it once, briefly, and then felt vaguely ashamed of himself for thinking about it, and filed the thought away where it would not make him feel like a bad son. He would think about that file later. He would think about it for a long time. The years between the wedding and Ray's diagnosis were unremarkable in the way that happy years often are. Ray and Linda went on a river cruise through Germany. They redecorated the living room in a shade of gray that Marcus privately found depressing. Linda grew tomatoes in the back garden and gave bags of them to Marcus and Diane every August. Ray fixed the crack in the kitchen tiles, finally, and sent Marcus a photograph of the finished grout as if it were a significant achievement, which Marcus had found quietly funny and had shown to his daughter Priya, who had not understood why it was funny. Ray had his first cardiac episode in autumn of 2022. A blockage, not a heart attack, caught early enough that a stent procedure sorted it out without drama. He was home within 48 hours, told to change his diet and take a small daily aspirin and not to worry unduly. He did not worry unduly. That was not his way. What changed, though Marcus did not recognize it as change at the time, was that Linda became his point of contact. When Marcus called to check on his father after the procedure, it was Linda who answered and relayed his father's condition. When the follow-up appointments came, it was Linda who drove Ray and Linda who spoke to the cardiologist. Ray would be on the phone for a few minutes after each appointment, cheerful and brief, telling Marcus everything was fine, telling him not to make the trip down for every little thing. Marcus believed him because Ray had always been healthy, and because Ray did not seem worried, and because Marcus, if he was honest, was relieved not to have to reorganize his schedule around something that was apparently not serious. He was busy, he had a depot to run. He had Priya every other weekend. He was not neglecting his father. He was trusting his father's reassurances. That trust, he would later understand, was exactly the opening that the situation required. Marcus drove down to Solihull 3 times between the cardiac episode and Christmas. Each visit followed the same shape. He arrived, Linda made tea, he and his father sat in the living room and talked about football and the depot and Priya, and then Linda would come in with biscuits, and gradually the conversation would expand to include her. And then it would be time for dinner, and then Marcus would drive home. He did not notice that his father seemed quieter than usual, or rather he noticed but attributed it to tiredness. Ray was 70 now. Tiredness seemed like a reasonable explanation. At Christmas that year, Ray had seemed more himself. He opened presents with genuine enthusiasm, fell asleep during a film in the afternoon the way he always had, argued cheerfully with Marcus about whether the gravy was too thin. Linda was attentive and organized, and had clearly spent a significant amount of energy making everything comfortable. Marcus drove home on Boxing Day thinking his father was doing well. He did not know that 4 weeks before that Christmas visit, in late November of 2022, Linda had instructed a conveyancer to begin the process of transferring the Solihull property into her sole name. He did not know this because no one told him, because why would they? The transfer was completed in February of 2023. Ray Calloway signed the transfer deed. His signature was witnessed by a friend of Linda's whom Marcus had never met. The land registry updated its records. The mortgage-free house in Solihull, valued at £340,000, passed from joint ownership between Ray and Linda to Linda Pierce's sole ownership without a word said to Marcus or Diane. Marcus was in a planning meeting when this happened. Diane was probably dropping her kids at school. There is a particular kind of legal document that looks completely ordinary and means everything. A land registry transfer deed is one of them. It is 2 pages of dry administrative language, boxes ticked, signatures appended. It does not look like the thing it is. It does not look like the erasure of 31 years of a man's labor from the record of what he owned. The second cardiac episode was worse. It happened in August of 2023, 6 months after the transfer was completed, and this time it was a full heart attack, a significant one, and Ray was in hospital for 11 days. When Marcus arrived, he drove down the same evening Linda called, a thing he could do in just over an hour on a clear run. His father was in the cardiac unit looking smaller than Marcus remembered, tubes in his arm, the skin around his eyes the color of old paper. They did not have a serious conversation about money or the house or what would happen. They talked about what people talk about when they are frightened and trying to seem not frightened. Ray asked about Priya. Marcus asked whether the hospital food was as bad as people said it was. Ray said it was worse. Ray came home in September. He was thinner. He moved more carefully. He got out of breath on the stairs, and Linda had organized a bed in the ground floor study so he did not have to manage the stairs multiple times a day. Marcus visited twice in September and once in October. Each time his father seemed to have shrunk slightly further, not in spirit but in presence, the way people sometimes do when a body starts the long process of withdrawing. Marcus mentioned a will to Linda once, obliquely, in October, standing in the kitchen while his father rested. He said something like, "Has Dad thought about sorting out his paperwork?" Linda said Ray found that kind of thing stressful and that she was managing everything for him and not to worry. She said it kindly. She handed him a mug of tea. The kitchen smelled of the soup she had been making, something with lentils and bay leaves, and Marcus took the tea and went to sit with his father, and he did not push it. He would replay that conversation for months afterward, the specific texture of not pushing it, the way he had weighed his father's comfort against a conversation that felt, in the moment, like it could wait. Ray Calloway died on the 14th of February, 2024. He was 70 years old, a third cardiac episode in his sleep, and the paramedics who arrived could not do anything useful by the time they got there. Linda called Marcus at 6:20 in the morning. He was already awake. The first 2 weeks after his father's death were dense with logistics. The registrar, the funeral home, the death notices, the flowers, the food that people brought to the house and left on Linda's kitchen counter. Marcus and Diane came and went from Solihull several times in those 2 weeks, staying in the spare room when it made sense, driving home when it didn't. Linda was composed in the way that people who have been through grief before are sometimes composed. Efficient, practical, not cold exactly, but organized where Marcus and Diane were dazed. She had already contacted the bank by the time Marcus thought to ask about it. She had already informed the pension provider. She managed all of it before he thought to offer to help, and when he offered, she told him it was in hand. He thought she was being capable. He thought he was being let off the hook. There was a moment 4 days after the funeral when Marcus sat in his father's old chair in the living room and noticed that the framed photograph that used to sit on the bookshelf, the one of Ray and Carol on holiday in Cornwall in the 1980s, both of them young and squinting into the sun, was no longer there. He looked for it among the other photographs on the shelf and on the windowsill and did not see it. He did not say anything. He told himself Linda probably had it somewhere, that she had probably moved it when she rearranged things after the funeral, that it was not worth mentioning. He was wrong about that, but not in the way he was wrong about the house. It was his cousin Brendan who first said something. Brendan was not a solicitor and had no particular expertise, but he had been through his own father's estate a few years earlier, and he knew enough to ask the question. He said to Marcus at the wake, "Has Linda mentioned anything about sorting out your dad's estate?" Marcus said she was managing the paperwork. Brendan looked at him for a moment and then said, "Does your dad have a will?" And Marcus properly realized for the first time, that he did not know. He did not know. Marcus called Linda the following morning and asked her directly whether his father had made a will. There was a pause before she answered. Not a long pause, but specific. She said she didn't think Ray had ever gotten around to it. She said she knew he'd always meant to. She said she was sorry that it was one of those things he'd put off, and that in the absence of a will, it all went through the intestacy rules. Marcus was not a solicitor either, but he knew enough about intestacy to know that under English law a spouse inherits the first £270,000 and half of anything above that from an intestate estate, with the remainder divided among the children. He did some rough arithmetic in his head. The house, he assumed, was in joint names, in which case it would pass automatically to Linda regardless of a will. The ISA and the pension income were separate matters. He needed to understand the full picture. He called a solicitor that afternoon. Not a family friend, not a recommendation from Linda, but a firm in Birmingham he found independently, a probate specialist. A woman named Helen Osai who had 15 years of experience in estate disputes, and who, when Marcus explained the situation over the phone, told him to come in and bring anything his father's name was on that he could access. It was Helen who ran the land registry search. It was Helen who printed the document and placed it on her desk and said in a careful voice, "This property was transferred in February of 2023. Into your stepmother's sole name." Marcus looked at the date. He looked at the name. He looked at the date again. The house was gone. Not contested, not in dispute, not subject to intestacy rules, not in probate at all. It was simply Linda's. It had been Linda's for over a year before Ray died, before he died. There was nothing Marcus could do about the house. Helen let him sit with that for a moment before she said anything further. Marcus drove home that evening on autopilot, the muscle memory of a route he had driven 100 times carrying him back to his flat in Birmingham while his mind remained in a solicitor's office in a building on Colmore Row. He called Diane from the car, hands-free, and told her what he had found out. She did not say anything for a long time. He could hear her breathing. Then she said she did it while he was alive, and Marcus said yes. And Diane said, why would he agree to that? And Marcus said he did not know. That question, why would he agree to that, became the spine of the next several months. Because there were two possible answers, and both of them were terrible. The first answer was that Ray had understood what he was signing and had chosen to give Linda the house, consciously and deliberately, knowing it would remove the asset from his children's inheritance. That he had made a private decision to restructure his estate around his wife without telling his children, for reasons of his own, reasons he never explained to anyone because he died before the subject came up. The second answer was worse. The second answer was that Ray, in declining health after his first cardiac episode, facing the anxiety and cognitive fog that cardiac patients often experience, had signed a document that had been presented to him in a context that made it seem less significant than it was. That Linda, or someone acting at Linda's direction, had handled the paperwork in a way that minimized Ray's understanding of what the transfer would mean for his children. Marcus could not prove the second answer. He could not disprove the first. And that uncertainty, that unresolvable space between two terrible explanations, was, Helen told him carefully, one of the most common features of cases like his. She asked him what he knew about his father's state of mind in late 2022, in the months after the first cardiac episode and before the transfer was completed. Marcus tried to remember. He had visited 3 times between the procedure and Christmas. His father had seemed quieter than usual. He had been on new medication. He had been tired. He had not had anyone present when he signed anything. Helen said she was not telling him there was a case to pursue. She was telling him there were questions worth asking. She said that the capacity required to sign a property transfer is not particularly high legally, but that if evidence existed that Ray had been in a significantly compromised state in November or December of 2022, it might be worth a conversation with his GP and with the cardiologist who had treated him. Marcus said he would think about it. He did not sleep that night. He lay in his flat and looked at the ceiling and thought about his father in the ground floor study on a hospital bed they had rented, getting out of breath on the stairs. And he thought about whether the man who raised him had looked at a transfer deed in November of 2022 and understood exactly what it meant, or whether he had looked at it and trusted the person handing it to him to explain it accurately. He would not know, he might never know, and that might be the cruelest part of all of it. The financial picture that emerged over the following weeks was bleak in its precision. Helen helped Marcus build a complete inventory of what Ray had left. The house was gone, fully and legally transferred, and no probate lawyer they consulted saw a realistic avenue for recovering it without significant evidence of undue influence or incapacity that would be both difficult and expensive to establish. The ISA, which had stood at £47,000 in 2022, had been drawn down to $11,000 by the time Ray died. Linda had been the ISA nominee and the joint account holder, and the withdrawals were legal. The pension income had ceased at Ray's death, as it was not a transferable benefit. The small defined benefit top-up from his earlier employer was also non-transferable. What was left in the estate, meaning what could actually pass through probate under the intestacy rules, amounted to $11,000 in the ISA, a car worth approximately $4,000, some personal possessions, and a joint current account that showed a balance of $3,200. Total estate value before Linda's statutory share, approximately £18,000. Under the intestacy rules, Linda received the first $270,000 of any estate outright. The entire estate fell below that threshold. Marcus and Diane inherited nothing. £340,000, $47,000 in savings, a man's entire working life, all of it legally structured into the hands of a woman they had known for 9 years and whose surname they did not share. Marcus sat at his kitchen table on a Saturday morning in April with all of these numbers in front of him, and he did the arithmetic, the simple, blunt arithmetic of what had happened and what it meant. He was 41 years old. He had $12,000 in savings. He had a mortgage on a flat he would not finish paying until he was 68. He had a teenage daughter whose future he had been quietly counting on supplementing with an inheritance that no longer existed. He had been making financial decisions for the last decade based on a set of assumptions about his family's future that turned out to have been quietly dismantled in a conveyancer's office 18 months before his father died. He had not been reckless. He had not been irresponsible. He had simply trusted the wrong assumptions, which is not the same thing but which produces the same result. Diane called him that Saturday afternoon. Her husband had looked into it too, separately through a friend who worked in property law. The news was the same. There was no realistic legal path to the house. The transfer had been properly executed. Ray had signed it. The capacity bar for signing such a document was low. Without evidence of active fraud or proven incapacity, the transfer would stand. Diane was quiet on the phone in a way that Marcus recognized. It was the quiet of someone who has finished crying and has not yet started figuring out what to do next. She said, "Do you think Dad knew?" Marcus said he did not know. She said, "I keep going back to that Christmas. He seemed fine at Christmas." Marcus said, "I know." She said, "Why didn't he tell us?" That was the question that sat underneath all the other questions. Because whatever had happened with the transfer, whether Ray had understood it fully or not, he had not mentioned it. Not at Christmas. Not during any of the visits Marcus had made in those months. Not in any of the phone calls. If he had made a decision to give Linda the house, he had made it privately and said nothing. And if he had signed something without fully understanding it, he had also said nothing, which might mean he did not realize there was anything to say. 9 years of Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and phone calls about nothing in particular. And this was somewhere underneath all of it the entire time. Marcus went back to Solihull in late April, not to confront Linda, or not primarily for that reason, but because there were still some of his father's personal items at the house that he wanted to collect. His father's watch, some photographs, a set of woodworking chisels that had belonged to his grandfather that Ray had kept in the garage for decades without ever using them, but had also never thrown away. Linda let him in. The house looked almost the same except that the furniture in the living room had been rearranged slightly, and there were new curtains in the dining room. The framed photograph of Ray and Carol in Cornwall had not reappeared. They sat in the kitchen with tea and did not speak for a while. Marcus had rehearsed something on the drive down, a careful, controlled version of what he needed to say, but sitting in the kitchen where Linda had made soup with lentils and bay leaves while his father rested upstairs, he found that the careful version did not come. He said, "I know about the house transfer." Linda held her mug with both hands. She said, "I thought you might have found that." He said, "Did he understand what he was signing?" She looked at the table. She said, "Your father wanted me to be secure. He was scared after the hospital. He didn't want me to be in a situation where I had nothing." Marcus said he had children. She said, "I know that." He said he had children and he never told us. She said quietly, "He said he would talk to you both when he was feeling better. He kept saying that." That was all she offered. Whether it was true, whether Ray had genuinely intended to have a conversation with his children that kept being deferred until it became too late, or whether that was Linda's explanation for a thing that had never involved any intention to disclose at all, Marcus could not know. He sat in his father's kitchen and looked at a woman who was 66 years old and had survived 2 husbands and now owned a house in Solihull outright. and he felt something that was too many things at once to name precisely. He got his father's watch. He got the photographs. He carried the woodworking chisels to his car in 2 trips. He drove home and did not call Diane until the following morning because he did not trust himself to be useful on the phone that night. The legal consultation that followed was thorough and expensive and ultimately conclusive. Helen had connected Marcus and Diane with a barrister who specialized in contested estates and undue influence claims. They spent 3 hours with him on a Friday afternoon in May, going through everything they knew. The timeline of the transfer, the medical records they had managed to obtain with Ray's GP's cooperation, the accounts from Ray's cardiologist about his condition in late 2022. What the medical records showed was that Ray had been on a combination of medications following the first cardiac episode, including a beta blocker and an anticoagulant, and that his GP had noted in November of 2022 that Ray had reported some difficulty concentrating and some short-term memory variability, which the GP had attributed to the medication adjustment. That note existed. It was dated 3 weeks before the conveyancer's records showed the transfer process beginning. It was something, it was not enough. The barrister was not cruel about it. He was precise. He said that a note about concentration difficulties and memory variability, in the absence of a formal cognitive assessment, in the absence of a diagnosis of incapacity, in the context of a transfer that had been properly witnessed and executed, was unlikely to be sufficient to establish that Ray had lacked the legal capacity to sign the deed. He said a case could be made on undue influence grounds if they could establish that Linda had applied improper pressure, or that Ray had been isolated from independent advice. He said establishing that, absent testimony from someone present at the signing, would be very difficult. He said, what you have is suspicious circumstances around a lawful transaction. Courts see that distinction. He said the litigation risk was significant. A contested property claim could cost £60,000 to £90,000 in legal fees, potentially more if it went to a full hearing, with no guarantee of success. Even a settlement scenario would likely consume a substantial portion of any recovered value, and there was a real possibility they would not recover anything at all. Marcus looked at Diane across the table. $12,000 in savings, a mortgage on a flat, a teenager who needed things. Diane looked back at him with an expression he could not fully read. The barrister gave them a week to think about it. They did not pursue the litigation. This is not a story where the son fights back through the courts and wins. This is not that story, because that is not usually how these stories go, and this channel has never pretended otherwise. The decision not to litigate was not a defeat exactly, though it felt like one for a long time. It was the recognition that throwing £60,000 at a 40% chance of recovering something from an estate that had already been dismantled was not a rational decision for 2 people in their financial positions, whatever it might have meant symbolically. Marcus paid Helen's fees, which came to £4,200. Diane paid her half, $3,000 or so when you added in the barrister's consultation. That money came from their savings. It was gone, and the house was still in Linda's name, and their father was still dead. The summer of 2024 was the hardest period. Not dramatically hard in the way that people imagine hard times from the outside, not full of visible crisis or obvious disaster, but quietly hard in the way that the removal of something you had counted on without fully knowing you counted on it tends to be. Marcus found himself doing calculations he had not done in years. looking at his retirement projections with the flat as his only significant asset, and working out what the numbers actually meant for a man who had no inheritance coming, no equity he could unlock for another 25 years, and a teenage daughter who was going to need support through university. He started paying more into his workplace pension. He cut what he could cut. He looked at his savings rate and realized it needed to be completely different from what it had been. He started doing the things he should probably have been doing regardless, which did not make the reason he was doing them feel any better. Diane made a different kind of reckoning. She and her husband decided to move. They found a smaller house in a less expensive part of Bristol, saved £800 a month on the mortgage, and redirected that money into savings and their children's accounts. It was practical. It was fine. It was not what they would have chosen. The fourth thing Marcus discovered, the thing that recontextualized everything that came before it, arrived not from a legal document but from a letter. It came in September, 6 months after the solicitor's office and the land registry search, in a plain envelope addressed to Marcus at his flat in his father's handwriting. Postmarked the 11th of February 2024. 3 days before Ray died. The envelope had been sitting in a pile of mail on his doorstep that had accumulated while he was in Solihull for the funeral, and he had brought it back with him and put it in a drawer with some other things he wasn't ready to deal with, and it had sat in the drawer for 6 months under some insurance documents, and a birthday card he had never gotten around to sending. Until one Sunday morning in September, he was looking for something else entirely, and he found it. His father's handwriting on a plain white envelope, that small, slightly cramped hand that Marcus had known his entire life. The postmark, the date. He sat at his kitchen table, and he did not open it for a long time. When he did open it, the letter inside was 2 pages, handwritten on the kind of plain white A4 notepaper that his father had used for everything. The same notepaper he used to write shopping lists on. The same notepaper he used for his crossword answers when he couldn't be bothered to write directly in the book. Ray had written it based on the content in the days before he died. Maybe the week before, maybe 2 days before. The handwriting was slower than Marcus remembered, less even, the letters more deliberate in a way that spoke of effort. Ray had written about Linda. He had written that he loved her and that he was grateful for her care, and he had written that he understood, looking back, that he had not handled things fairly. He had written that he had signed the house transfer because he was frightened after the hospital, and because Linda had told him it would protect her, and that he had not fully thought through what it would mean for Marcus and Diane, and that he had been meaning to talk to them and had not found the moment. He had written that he was sorry. He had written that he had asked Linda to be fair to his children after he was gone. He had written that he trusted she would be. He had not written to Linda separately what fair would mean. He had not specified. He had trusted. He had trusted in the same way that had characterized his entire approach to the situation. The same faith in people's decency that had been, depending on how you looked at it, his greatest quality or the single thing that had cost his children the most. Marcus read the letter 3 times. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time after the 3rd reading. The afternoon light moved across the floor of his flat and reached his feet and moved past them, and at some point he realized he had been sitting there long enough that it was nearly dark, and he had not moved and had not eaten and had not called anyone. He had the letter. It was not a will. It was not a legal document of any kind. It was an expression of intent from a man who could no longer express anything, a private reckoning that had been sealed and posted in the last days of his life, and had been sitting in a drawer for 6 months while his son paid solicitors and saw barristers, and did the arithmetic of what had been lost. He called Diane the following morning. He read her the letter over the phone, his voice doing the thing voices do when they are trying to be steady and not quite managing it. She was quiet the way she had been quiet before. He could hear the sounds of her house in the background, her children's voices somewhere, the ordinary sounds of a morning. She said he knew it wasn't right. Marcus said yes. She said, and he thought Linda would do the right thing on her own. Marcus said that's what he thought. She said, "What do we do with this?" That was the question. What do you do with a letter that tells you your father knew he had been unfair, that he relied on someone's goodwill to correct it, that the goodwill did not materialize, and that the legal mechanisms that might have addressed it are beyond your financial reach and your appetite for years of uncertain litigation? They talked about sending Linda a copy of the letter. Marcus had thought about it. He was not sure what he wanted from that. An acknowledgement, an apology, a gesture, some gesture that would signal her awareness that Ray had wanted something different from what had actually happened. He did not expect a check. He was not expecting the house. He was not sure what he was expecting. He sent Linda the letter, a copy of it by recorded post without a cover note, just the copy. He did not know what he wanted her to do with it, but he knew he could not sit with it without sending it. She did not respond. She did not respond in September or October or November. Christmas came and went. She did not respond. The house in Solihull was listed on the market in January of 2025, roughly 11 months after Ray's death. It sold in March for £328,000. Marcus knew this because the property listing went up online and Diane saw it first and sent him the link without comment. He watched the listing change from for sale to sold subject to contract to sold without clicking on any of the photographs. He already knew what the kitchen looked like. He knew which tile his father had finally fixed. The money from that sale went into Linda Pierce's bank account. It will do whatever she chooses with it. That is the legal reality, cleanly and completely. She owned it, she sold it, the money is hers. There is nothing in any of this that was illegal in a way that the law currently addresses, which is its own kind of statement about where the law currently stands. Marcus has thought about it that way sometimes. About the gap between legal and fair being wide enough, in certain specific circumstances, that a person can walk a mortgage-free house through that gap and come out the other side with enough money to retire on, and the people who might have expected something from that house can do nothing but watch. He has not become bitter, or not entirely. He has become something different, something harder to name precisely. He is more deliberate now. He manages his money with an attention he did not previously bring to it, the kind of attention that comes not from expertise but from having watched what happens in the absence of it. He has a will. He has had one since June of 2024, drawn up 3 months after his father's death, 12 pages including a trust provision for Priya. He paid £350 for it, and considered that £350 the most important he had ever spent. He has thought about his father. He has thought about the Raymond Calloway who built a pension for 30 years and paid off a house, and said at Christmas dinner that whatever he had would go to his children. The man who meant what he said when he said it, and who then, in the fear and fog of his decline, signed a document that unmade that intention without quite recognizing what he was doing. He has thought about whether his father was naive or trusting or something in between that does not have a clean name. He has thought about the fact that his father wrote to him, that in the last days of his life, Ray sat down and wrote 2 pages in his careful, slowing hand and sealed them and posted them, and that the letter arrived 3 days after Ray was gone, sitting on a doorstep in Birmingham while Marcus was in Solihull making funeral arrangements, waiting in a pile of mail for 6 months until a Sunday in September. That letter is the thing Marcus keeps coming back to. Not the house, not the transfer deed, not the solicitor's office or the barrister's estimate of litigation risk. The letter. Because the letter was his father admitting, in the private language of 2 pages of plain white notepaper, that he had gotten it wrong. And the letter was also his father trusting, to the end, in a way that the facts had already made impossible. Marcus does not know what to do with both of those things at once. He has stopped expecting a single, clean feeling to emerge from all of it. Some griefs are too complicated for one feeling, and the only honest thing to do is carry all of them together and see how the weight shifts over time. He still has the woodworking chisels. They are on a shelf in his flat. He has never used them either. He is probably not going to. Diane planted tomatoes last spring, in her smaller garden at the smaller house in Bristol, in pots on the patio because the garden itself is mostly a play area for the children. She grew more than she expected. She gave some to her neighbors and kept the rest. She did not say anything to Marcus about them. He found out because Priya, who visits Diane's family sometimes with Marcus on weekends, mentioned it in the car on the way home. "Auntie Diane has loads of tomatoes, Dad. Why does everyone in your family grow tomatoes?" Marcus did not explain. He said it was a family thing, which was true in the only way that mattered. He drove the rest of the way home thinking about his father in a garden on a summer afternoon, handing bags of tomatoes to his children. Something ordinary and seasonal and given freely, not because of what it was worth, but because it was there and it was summer and he had grown them, and that was simply what you did. That is the version of Raymond Calloway that Marcus has decided to keep. The rest of it, the transfer deed, the conveyancer's office, the letter in the drawer, the sold sign on a house in Solihull, the rest of it is real and it happened and it matters. But it is not all of his father. And Marcus has learned slowly in the long plain months since February of 2024 that what you choose to hold close and what you choose to set down is one of the few decisions in situations like this that actually remains yours. He is 42 now. He has a daughter. He has a will. He has a mortgage with 24 years left on it and savings that are growing more carefully than they used to, and a pension he takes seriously in a way he did not before. He is not where he expected to be. He is also not destroyed, which is its own kind of thing to hold on to at 2 in the morning when the arithmetic of what was lost runs uninvited through his mind. He turns off the light. He thinks about the chisels on the shelf. He thinks about a tile that was finally fixed. He goes to sleep. If any part of what Marcus went through sounds familiar, the handshake agreements, the transfers that nobody mentioned, the paperwork that seemed like somebody else's problem until it became entirely yours, this is where that gets talked about without judgment. Every week, stay close.